How did you enjoy being back at Best 22? Were there some moments in Gather Round that you would have preferred it to be Best 18? Well, this is why I like Best 22. Survival of the fittest. But there is a ton of stuff we have to unpack as we head towards another big week for SuperCoach and AFL Fantasy coaches on our strategy sessions. We've got to talk about the upgrade cadence and the moves you're making this week. How do you identify the right premiums to get into? Who are these rookies that we should be prioritizing over others? We've had 70 dual position player changes. We've got to talk about them. And our structures have changed drastically over the last few weeks, specifically in our defensive line. But is it right to keep running the rookie gauntlet in defense? We're going to unpack that and more on this week's strategy session. Joining me on the podcast, though, as he does every single week of these strategy sessions, it's fellow coaches panelist, MiniMonk. Hello, mate. Nice to see you. You're up and about in a couple of the formats too. I've gone through the player ranking. I'm like, I know that, coach. I see you, my brother. I see you.
You're not doing too shabbily yourself. It's good to be on. Okay. It's good to be on. I wish it was all the formats. Thankfully, my AFL fantasy rank is a little bit down the drain, so I've got room to improve there. But it's been good. I'm thankful to be back in Best 22. I think it is very much showing the squads that have set themselves up really well for attacking this next phase of the season as we go between the early season buys and the mid-season buys. And I'm really excited to see how much of a moving and shaking week this is, because I think this might be one of the first weeks where we truly start to see a lot of divergence, not only between the formats, but also between what coaches are choosing to do with their upgrades.
And I think the reason we see some divergence is we start to see coaches and how they like to play the game, whether they're being led by the crowd, they're being led by a fixture, they're reacting off the back of either a great week the week prior or something's changed that they have to do, or are they maintaining a specific discipline and process? And maybe that's where we should start, because I think a lot of coaches are looking at an upgrade trade this week. In SuperCoach and Dream Team, when you've got the boost, you can still do the luxury of 2 downgrades and then go up to the premium you like. Whereas in AFL Fantasy, pick your poison, and we will talk about Gross and also Cleary helping you decide which of the two is right for the format for you, and then go and get a premium. But coaches are probably chasing after one of 3 things with their upgrade this week, Mini, and I thought it'd be good to talk about how you identify the right process to pick the right player for your unique team's position. Some are going purely after someone that they just want as an evergreen captain for the next couple of weeks. Probably the best identifier of that would be a Zach Merritt. They've seen what he's been this year. Better in fantasy than SuperCoach, but still a good SuperCoach pick. I think he's going 115, 116 in that format at the moment. So he's not doing wrong at all. But they look at what this next kind of 6 weeks of game looks like, starting with West Coast, and they're like, that's it. There's no value in this pick, but I'm going to get the captain. So people make a captaincy-based decision with their upgrade. Others then choose to be kind of led by the fixture a little bit. And in Merritt's case, it's almost the combination of the two. Others are looking at his teammate in a Nick Martin going, look, he's been fine, but the fixture's amazing. And for players that score through transition, these are some gravy matchups. They might even be looking at a Christian Petracca, who is fine this week, but the 2 weeks after is as good as you can get for an inside mid and a high half forward. And then you've probably got the other camp of traders. You're looking at people that are playing purely the break-even game and going, and Nick Dacos is ripe for the picking. Jason Horne-Francis is ripe for the picking. In certain formats, you could potentially even put a Harry Sheasel into the mix of that as well and go, look, their break-evens at a point, but it's below their average. I don't see them getting much cheaper all aboard. So people are making 3 different upgrade choices: captaincies, fixture-based, or break-even based. How do you go about, and how would you encourage a coach to make a decision for the right upgrade? Because all are perfectly valid, but it doesn't mean it would be the right play for every unique team.
Absolutely not. And everyone's going to want to play the game differently. That's the really fun part about fantasy AFL. You know, you get a lot of different options, and coaches are going to do different things. And at the end of the season, we get to see who's made the right decisions and who hasn't. And coaches then change the way they approach the season after based off of that. And I think that those three categories that you've talked about in captaincy, fixture, and value have all got merit associated with them. They've all got a reason as to why the coach is making that particular decision. But there's a couple of other factors we also really want to consider as well, as what can we actually afford with the rookies that we want to trade out? And the other thing we need to look at is what rookies are we actually going to be fielding, and does the player that I'm bringing in a particular week allow me to field the rookies that I want to, not necessarily just for this particular week coming up, but maybe in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Now, players like Merritt and Dacos in your midfield have opened up a lot this week because we've had those DPP positions come in. And a lot of the players that we've had, particularly our rookies that we've had, have picked up either a defender mid status in someone like a Finn O'Sullivan or mid forward status in someone like a Levi Ashcroft. And that allows us to say, I can just field Levi in my forward line instead, and I can bring in the mid this week. And I think that's a fantastic option. I think that that's the right way to approach it. And I think that, you know, being able to put someone like a Levi Ashcroft into your forward line and field him there instead of into your midfield and go for the midfield premium that you want is a completely viable structure. But then consider what the upgrade's going to be in potentially the week after and the week after that. Are you wanting to be grabbing a defender premium next week and needing to be able to open up a space there? Or do you want to grab a forward premium? Say maybe you don't have a Jason Horne-Francis or a Rankin, or you want to grab a Petracca or a Chad Warner who have picked up DPP. You got to think about what the compounding effects of these sorts of trades are. I think that the captaincy argument is a reasonable one if you look at your team. We are now, 5 weeks deep into the season. We know where the relatively good fixtures and where the tougher fixtures lie across the lines. DVP type matchups have a bit more data sampling behind them. You've got a sample size of 5, which as a scientist myself, I think that's starting to get towards a reasonable amount of sample size. It's not perfect, obviously, but it gives you a bit of more confidence in the decision that you're making. And you probably have a list of 4 or 5 players in your team that you're trusting with the armband on a particular week. And so if you might only have 2 or 3 and you've only got 1 player that you can really trust with the armband this week, that might be a good sign that you need to go for someone that's got a particularly gravy fixture this week. You talked about it before. Zach Merritt's got an ideal fixture against West Coast on the Friday night. It makes a perfect vice captain. Andrew Brayshaw has the Saturday first game against Melbourne, which is also a great fixture. Even a Nick Dacos against Brisbane has a pretty good fixture, and he has a pretty good history against them as well. And if you're saying, I want a vice captain in and roll into one of those other 2 I mentioned before as your captain, very viable. But the way that I like to play the game, and I know it's the way that you like to play the game, I think as well, is that you've got to be focusing on being able to get an upgrade, not just this week, but in the 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks to come. And you've got to be able to get ahead, or at least at the curve of hitting that premium, or at least that underpriced premium that can go at close enough to a level. And that's why someone like Petracca is a fantastic player to look at this week. Someone like a Nick Dacos, despite the fact that he's over $1 million AFL Fantasy and close to that 600K marker in SuperCoach, is still a fantastic option because he is a player who presents value from what their starting price is. So I guess the question I have for you is, if we're going towards that value mentality, what are the top 3 players that you kind of are looking at in that value space now?
I think right out of the top of the gate, Dacos has to sit in that value consideration across the formats. He's got that history against Brisbane that's pretty favourable. And I think importantly, to add on to the top of the Dacos narrative, is we were all fearing what James Jordan would do for him, who for 18 months has obliterated multiple premiums, including Dacos himself. He's damaged Neil. He's killed Whitfield at times. This is the first time I can recall that he has had to be taken off as a tag. I can't, and because it wasn't working, not because the team had a structural change they needed to address. So I think Dacos sits right at the top of that space for me. I like Petracca because again, you talk about break even and average versus potential and fixture all together. He's there. And then probably the other one that's worth looking at is a Jason Horne-Francis. Now he's a bit different because for him, he's shown he's a little bit hot and cold, not just this year, but over the kind of the last 25 games of football. He's shown us that he's the sort of player that on his day, he is a 110 performer comfortably. He's also shown when it's not his day, Sam Davidson will double his score. And that's not Davidson going 100. That's just Davidson going an 80. Like, that's not out of the realms of possibilities here. So I think there's a bunch of really good value options just on those three alone that you can head into with confidence. I still think Tom Green is a really nice price point. I think Connor Rosie and SuperCoach is at a really nice price point. And so to me, I would lean in a similar space to you, which is if you've got through the first 5 weeks of the season without a worry of who's going to be my captain, well, why is it going to be the only different in the next 5 weeks? You should have had multiple options to get you to this junction that you could put the VC or C on this week. And so paying up for a captaincy option when they're at a no value space or you're not getting any financial reward and you're forecasting that the fixture is the only reason for it. Ask Tom DeConing owners how that went for you last week. I know that is clearly stat picking. I'm completely aware of that because the matchup for Rucks against Eagles looked great and it wasn't in that week. But there's no certainties in fantasy football, right? Both you and I have played this game long enough, let alone maybe as you're listening or watching this. Just because a fixture's right, just because a matchup is right, just because the conditions are right, there's no certainty for anything. So I'm not a huge fan of paying for a guy at their perceived peak value. I'd much rather hunt the value, save that extra 50K, save that extra 150K, because I think the loss of points that I might have that week of a Dacos to merit, let's say Dacos is a 110. So let's not undersell him. Let's just say what he, a little overs what he's historically been in fantasy, a little unders what he's been in SuperCoach, right? Merit goes 130. That is a good outcome. It might be unders in some, but I think it's a safe marker. You're 20 points down this week, but you're 100K better off in fantasy and 50K better off in SuperCoach. Well, what does that money do for you next week? And can that get a rookie off field for you? And all of a sudden now you're going to be 50 or 60 points better off next week, and the 20 or 30 points you've lost out this week, well, now you've caught up. And now that's obviously a lot of parallels and assumptions there, but it's very easy to just get fixated on your upgrade trade as a 1 week play, not as a season long ideology.
You don't get stuck in having to do that weird in-between week where you go to someone who's in that 500K bracket in AFL Fantasy, or
the tweener pick.
High threes, low 400s in SuperCoach, because those are the ones that really hurt you because they can just sit and they rot in your team. It's like going for a mid-price at the start of the season that doesn't pop, but at least then you've got the chance to be able to jump off of them fast. Right now, you can't afford to go to one of those tweener picks. Realistically, like in AFL Fantasy, if you're looking at anyone who's probably under the 800K bracket, it's pretty poor in terms of just trying to pick someone that's going to be close enough to a top 6 premium, or even under about the 480, 490K bracket. I think there's a couple in there in SuperCoach that you can look at and that present enough value to be a viable trading option that can go close to top 6, but it starts to get really, really dicey. Whereas if you can go, I'm getting a 550K guy in SuperCoach or a 950K guy in AFL Fantasy this week, and then I get another one of those guys the week after, and I can get another one of those guys the week after that, and it just compounds. It stacks on itself. That's the position to be in, because by the time you get to round 10, round 11, you might only have the 2 rookies, and they're the rookies that you want to field for as long as you can. You might only have those 2 as the last 2 left in your team. And there might be other teams that have got 3 or 4 and they don't know whether the rookie they're going to field is going to pop them a 50 or a 30 on any given week. And that's a horrible position to be feeling like you're in.
Yeah. One of those tweeners that I think people are looking at this week, I'm keen to get your take on, is a Ned Long. Like, he's in that sort of almost 300,000 marker in SuperCoach, mid 500s. Like, he feels like the perfect identifier of a tweener pick. What's your take there? Because from a points per minute perspective, we know he's a knockout in that regard. If depending on when you're watching or listening to this, my SuperCoach trade targets episode will give you a little insight on what I think about that as a pick. But what's your take on him? Because he probably is that personification this week of the tween pick, where you kind of make some money and bank some scores. What's your take on not only on him as a pick right now, but him as a pick right now in the context of where we are in the season?
My query to the coaches that are going to him is, what is the logic in going to him? Like, are you going to him alongside the rookie that you've missed and you're doing this as a micro upgrade? I think if that's the case, I don't mind it as much. But if you're getting a premium and him and you're missing out on both Cleary and Gross, or you're not going for someone like a Cottrell, sorry, is it a Cottrell? I can't remember. The Carlton defender rookie. I've got it right.
Yep.
Or even, some coaches might be even looking at someone like a Sidar Hawley. It just doesn't feel like it's the right move. You're trying to bank on a guy that's going to go at, 80 AF, 85 AF, and maybe 90 SuperCoach from now until the buys is probably the aim. He was fantastic on Friday night. He was arguably the second best on ground, only behind Dacos. And yet he still only had 104 fantasy and 114 SuperCoach as a spike score. Now, yes, that's going to be in his price cycle for a few weeks, but you're not worried just about his cash generation. You're worried about his points in field, because you don't go to a guy that's 550k in AFL fantasy and 300k in SuperCoach nearly to just get cash generation. You need them to be banking in, week out, reliable scoring. And with how much uncertainty there is and how much movement there is in that Pies midfield, yes, Fly has said that he won't be sub anytime soon, but that doesn't mean that he's not going to get a different role to what he had on Friday night on any given week. And to me, that concerns me way too much.
Yeah, a very similar thought process to that. Hey, before we move on to defender rookies, can we come back to the fixture piece just a little bit? Because I felt like we had an unpacking of that conversation around captaincy and break even and value quite well. But from a fixture perspective, there's probably two teams that I think coaches are identifying that have not just a 2 or 3 week good fixture, but have probably a 4 to 8 week run. And that would be Essendon, probably more for midfielders and players that score through their midfield transition. And probably Hawthorn sit in as that other. You could say others have nice 2 week blocks here, 3 week blocks there, but sort of from now till sort of round 12, they're the two teams that I think most coaches using DVP have gone, I'd like some shares of that, which again adds to the narrative of why it might not be a value play, but it's a captaincy place I'm in on merit. It's why people are looking at the recently forward added Nick Martin, because they go, the role as a high half forward, he's shown he can hit a ceiling there, not just last week, but even last year and prior to when he played in that role. They look at that Hawthorn midfield and go, Jai can smash it out on his day. Mackenzie and Ward have both shown at times this year that their value plays, let alone a Dylan Moore, who's a forward but plays through the midfield. Maybe not so much a centre bounce mid, although he did on the last half of the weekend when they were flipping the magnets. But we know he gets up and around the ground, even if he's not playing at centre bounce. Who of those kind of teams and players, and are there others that we should be considering as upgrade options this week as we also look at the break-evens and the captains?
Yeah, I think Newcomb is a fantastic one that coaches that are really switched on have started looking at as well. His with-without statistics with Will Day are through the roof. I think he averages over 110 without him. And you look at his next 5 fixtures being Geelong, West Coast, Richmond, Melbourne, and Gold Coast. It's utter gravy. So if you're wanting to take a punt on a bit of a pod and someone that you think can actually take the next step and go from being, a top 20 midfielder by scoring to a top 8 midfielder by scoring, then I think that he's someone that I would definitely be looking at. You mentioned people wanting to get a look at the team, some other teams as well. Like Melbourne have got a couple of good fixtures coming up after this week in Richmond and West Coast back to back. That's why Petracca has gone right up in calculations for a lot of coaches. People really should be looking a few weeks in advance to see who are players that have dropped in cash who are coming into a good fixture run maybe in 2 or 3 weeks' time. And one that really sticks out to me is actually Sydney. Sydney have Port Adelaide this week, Gold Coast, and then GWS. And then right after that, they go Essendon, Carlton, Melbourne, Adelaide, Richmond before their bye. That screams to me, hello, Chad Warner. Like if they've saw their midfield mixed out and, people are really looking for a reason as to what happened in that game where he was subbed out on a low time on ground, low score. He was sick during the week. they actually were trying to do him a favor by resting him up. The game was gone. They didn't need to do anything more. So they just gave him the rest. And if he shows anything in these next 2 to 3 weeks, he's someone that I will have no issue launching into, especially with that forward status. So when you're looking at those sorts of fixtures, really try and identify like a 2, 3, 4 week block. It doesn't have to be all green matchups. It just has to be, 3 or 4 in a row or 3 or 4 out of a 5-week block and the price be right. And it's just like, you're getting someone who's priced at 90 who can do 100 to 105. And those are the picks that really separate you from the pack. And I think the other thing we forgot to mention, and I think this is a really important part in your upgrade cadence at this time of year, is you need to start having a sneaky look at your buys and start having a little bit of a look at your buy structure. There is a lot of ease this year, given that the buys are over a 5-week block, but there are a lot of players that will be in our starting squads that will have had the round 12, will have the round 12, round 13, or round 14 buys, just by nature of the fact that we really tried to avoid those players that had the early buy in the season. And because of that, we really want to be looking for teams that have those round 15 and round 16 buys. So if I go through them just quickly, it's West Coast, the Western Bulldogs, Richmond, those are a couple of round 14s, but Melbourne, Hawthorn, GWS, Geelong, Essendon, Brisbane, Adelaide. Like there are some really interesting targets in a lot of those teams. And so if you can combine, of those 6 factors that we really talked about, price, captaincy potential, fixture, buy, positional status even as well, if you can combine 4 or 5 of those together into a particular player, that's when it should be a big green tick next to their name. It'd be someone that you should be putting right at the top of your priority list for, if not this week, potentially in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
I want to ask you about our defensive structures. It's amazing how it's changed drastically over the last 5 weeks. We started the season with this narrative from the community of, I don't want any defender rooks on field. And if I'm having any, I only want one. And then we depart last week and we're like, I'm happy to have 2 on field, Bice and insert other cow through there. And now coming out of Gather Round, even more so, it's, could I have 3? Now, Bice, while a rookie by original starting price, is not really, as a points per minute, so including the games where he's been vested, is not performing like your traditional rookie. He's performing much closer to a mature age rookie in that regard, which is what he is. But I'm keen on your take because I feel like the stars aligned last week that enabled us to get it to be accessible to put 3 rookies on field. The fixture defensively for Pryor and for Reid was awesome. Defenders against Melbourne is great. Now, it didn't pop for Pryor, but it absolutely did for Reid. Trainer has shown now 3 weeks in a row that 65 feels like a safety blanket basement for him, and he can hit that 80s and 90 depending on the format that you've played. And then Bice is a man on his own. But to keep him in that conversation, we will. Let alone, as you mentioned, Carlton have given us a potential option that might get another game. Asad El Houli, if he can get 3 of the rest, might give us another game, let alone others that could sit through there. Connor Stone, I suppose, technically, counts in that space for us as well as a defender rook. So my question is, can you, from a structural perspective, run 3 defender rooks on field from here for the next couple of weeks? Or was last week just the aberration because the fixture enabled it to be a play?
I think both are true. I think that you can run 3, but I wouldn't expect the same results as what we got this week. I think Bice is a fieldable option along all the way up until his bye. I think that him and Levi Ashcroft have shown enough to this point to almost be the last 2 rookies that you upgrade. We had this chat pre-pod. I think we both agreed that those 2 are almost in a league of their own. You can't even put someone like Davidson in the same league. Can't even put Trainer in the same league. It's not close. So you're always going to be running 1 defender rookie. I think that with the fact that all of Pryor, Reed, Trainer. I put Sadahuli in there. I don't like it as much, but a Cottrell as well. Or Carroll. It's Carroll. That's the one. Is also a viable defender fieldable option as well. I think the fact that we have so many of them that are viable, I think that 2 is where you actually want to be. And that way you can pick the matchup. But I think 3 is definitely an option, but I would be really not trying to push my luck for long. Like, you've got a couple with good fixtures this week, but you don't want to be riding those good fixtures ad infinitum because they're not going to always hold out. You're not always going to have 3 defender rookies with a good fixture that are all going to score in the 80s or 90s. I think that that's not viable because it hamstrings you. So, if you're trading into a defender, you've got the likes of a Tom Stewart who's come down in price in AFL Fantasy and SuperCoach, who's at a really good jump on point if you're wanting to pivot away from 3 defenders on field to 2 defenders on field. But yeah, I would encourage coaches to try and have a look as to reasons why these players popped in score this week. The big one that I think Caiden put out as a stat is an indicator of how a player scores is how many handball receives they get. It's not a massive indicator, but it's a pretty good indicator. And if you look at the likes of Riley Bice, he's through the roof. If you look at Trainer and Reed, they both got I think it was 8 and 7 respectively. Pryor isn't someone that they're going to be wanting to give the ball to, so I think that he's one that I wouldn't really want to field. But those are the sorts of indicators that I'd be looking at for my players and using that to guide my decision making about the rookies I want to field.
It just feels like it's increasing your risk profile in your side, not unnecessarily, but it's increasing your risk profile if you've got that many rooks in there. You almost are hoping that you're like, I'll put it there because I can get the upgrade in my forward line to the Petracca or the Martin type or the Horn-Francis type. Again, fully aware that Martin is a defender too. Or I can get Dacos, I can get Merritt, I can get Green, I can get whomever is the value mid-premium that I want. And I'm going to hope that upgrade and that combine to get me out of jail. But yeah, getting rooks off field is still a pretty high priority. Let's not forget that. And so, yeah, I'm not a fan of doing that. Speaking of rookies, there's 2 across the formats that are prime for the picking this week. Now, in SuperCoach and Dream Team, the boost kind of means it's not as big of a dilemma. But if you're banking a decent amount of cash, you might be in the position where you're looking at a double upgrade this week. I'm not too sure there's a heap of coaches that have got that, but let's give people the opportunity that they could be there. So it's less of a necessity to worry which for which, whereas AFL Fantasy, if you're trying to upgrade, which I'd hope you should be able to do this week, it might be a different conversation. I'm, of course, alluding to Gross and I'm alluding to Cleary. One's forward eligible, one's mid eligible. Prices are comparable. It is safe to say ish. It's not massive. It's comparable. And break evens are comparable across the formats. There's gaps there again. It's always dangerous to go fantasy and SuperCoach the same, but it's not like it's wildly different, which is why coaches are genuinely at the dilemma point this week of, which do I pick? Do I let Fixture be the guy? Do I let the role that they would play in my team for the upgrade I want to make be the reason? Do I let their job security be the reason? Do I let their scoring ceiling be the reason? Which neither's bad, but neither's awesome either. Neither of them popped up a ton and gone bice mode on us just yet. What should I'll start that question again. What should we be doing with how we pick between the two? Because again, for AFL Fantasy, I think it's a harder, because you can really only pick one for the majority of teams. SuperCoach, you at least have a boost to outlet. So how do you pick?
I think I'm going to cover SuperCoach and Dream Team very quickly here. The only reason why you shouldn't be getting both of Gross and Cleary this week is if you already own one of them.
Agree.
I think it's really just that simple. I think if it leaves you with, I don't think it matters how much cash it leaves you in the bank. Those 2 are just absolute must gets. It's potentially the second last batch of really good rookies we get for the year, and they both have shown that they can be money makers. AFL Fantasy is where it gets a lot harder. There is genuinely a world where you pick up one this week and you pick up the other the next week. And I've battled in my head as to which one it is. I think they both have fantastic job security, despite what some people might make you believe about Sydney. I think the fact that Cleary has shown himself to be a great kind of pressure roaming forward, where he's not playing just as a small forward, he's actually roaming quite far up the ground in order to get involved. It's a fantastic role for him to be in, and I think that the coaches are actually seeing it as well. Gross, I think, also has fantastic job security. They are in a play the kids mode, and the media is starting to pile onto them now. That they're really seeing just how rough it might be for the Eagles, because the team is in a bit of a rut. They're in a bit of a hole, and they need to figure the way out, and the way out is to play kids. So he's someone that has to get consistent games at this point to be able to show what he's got. Matchup is reasonable for both. Caiden Cleary has Port Adelaide, which, despite what people might think, is actually not too bad of a role for someone playing in his sort of general forward, pushing up the ground position. And obviously Gross has Essendon, which, again, also surprisingly, isn't actually a bad matchup for inside midfielders. Then you want to break the tie, you go to Junior Pedigree, and Junior Pedigree just shows you that Cleary is the player that knows how to accumulate the ball. He knows how to put himself into the right spots and to be able to just pop. And if one of these players is going to pop a score and get to a price point where it's harder to get to next week, it's Cleary. And so for me, he's the one that I'd be looking to trade into this week. And I think it's very, sorry, just very quickly, I think it's very likely that the one that you don't trade into this week in AFL Fantasy, you should be highly considering to trade into next week.
Now, we'll talk about the DPPs in a moment, but does the fact that we've gained such an enormous number, I can't recall there being 70 in a position status ever. The first big one is always going to see the biggest change because teams have structurally made some differences. Players are being managed into the start of the season, a bunch of different variable reasons. And politely, it's the smallest data point to be able to have a positional change at 35%, given there's only such a small sample size, it compounds over the season. But I don't know if teams are out of necessity choosing one because they have to get the mid or they have to get the forward. I don't think that's a tiebreaker, whereas historically that probably would be for us in our teams. We go, no, I need the mid downgrade, so I'll pick one over the other. But I think with like 70 players getting it, and a lot of them in our rookie territories, you've mentioned Davidson, Ashcroft, Wicks has picked it up, Hall has already had it for people that were sitting in there. Wicks has picked it up through there. Stone has picked it up. O'Sullivan has picked it up. Like, we've got at least 4 of these guys in our team, if not more. So, and let alone now with Flex added into SuperCoach and Dream Team, you've always had that versatility with Fantasy's utility, even though it's not on field, the utility to move things around. I don't think that becomes the definer where it might previously have been for us. I think you're right. It comes down to who do I want more? Does who ends up on field this week become a bit more of a discussion or a tiebreaker for you though?
It does a little bit. But in the reality, like most coaches are looking to either upgrade in their midfield and forward line this week. You look at the ins across the formats. There's players like Petracca, Dacos, Merritt, Brayshaw. It's one of those two lines, and the way that people are getting around one of those two lines is they're either moving a mid forward into their midfield or they're moving someone like an Ashcroft who picked up DPP into their forward line. I think that we should have enough DPP across the rookies that we have in our teams. You know, the players in the likes of Ashcroft, Wicks, Stone, Foz, they are going to allow you enough flexibility to be able to choose the rookies that you want to field basically no matter what, whichever of Cleary or Gross you bring in this week. And so I don't think that that's really not really in my mind, the defining factor behind which of the two to bring in, because I think that you can probably get to a position where you're fielding the same rookies either way. And it's always going to depend on which rookies you're choosing to trade out as well.
Yeah, Look, I'm on Cleary in AFL Fantasy. If you haven't checked out on our YouTube channel, every Monday, late afternoon, early evening, I do my top 10 trade targets for the week. Wednesday afternoon, early evening, we do a SuperCoach version, which again, depending on when you're watching or listening to it, it's either coming or it's here and landed for you already. I've got Cleary as the number one. I'll just stand out. He's the number one trade target for me across the formats. If you're making any downgrade this week, to me, it is Cleary. The role I like. How he's playing that role, I like. His job security in that side, I like. The fixture is favourable for him, I like. The scoring pedigree I've seen, not only as a junior, but at VFL and even in this role. And I like that he's got a basement that's really protective of him being able to score with that tackling and that pressure game that he brings. It feels like I can bank on this 30-odd points that is just going to be there even if he doesn't win the ball. I feel like I've got this 30 points per game base, given the role that he plays in the team.
Yep. And that's exactly what you want with rookies. You know, if you get a rookie that pops a 90 on any given week, it's fantastic. You love to have it, but you really just want to avoid the rookies that drop you a 30 or a 20 on field. Like, those are the ones that really hurt when you say, oh, I had a 60 on my bench and I've got a 15 or a 20 on field. Like, if you've got someone that's got a high floor associated with them, it's fantastic for rookies, and it's the reverse with our premiums. You want premiums that have the really high ceiling.
It's true. Hey, before we wrap up the episode, we probably should talk about the 70 new dual position players that have hit the game. There's a ton of them that are irrelevant, that are just not even worth the oxygen of conversation on the podcast. They're accurate, but they're not worth talking about for us. Then you've got a chunk that I think are handy and helpful in our draft formats of the game. Someone like a Fletcher, a Peatling, these kind of guys that are they high priority upgrades for us this week in Classic? Look, probably not. They've shown they can score, but what they are is guys that have really been like, oh, I didn't see that coming at the start of the season. This is a huge gain for me if I can protect that loss of midfield with something on the bench, and that's a boost of scoring in my forward or defensive lines. So they're important names, but I think there's probably a handful that across Classic and Draft that are probably worth just making sure. People should know it by now. It's been out since Sunday night, but is it just as simple as Petracca, Warner and Martin are the three forwards that we should give any oxygen to on the podcast? Because we know we've picked up some defenders too, the Lairds, the Dacos, to name a few. Have we seen now an abundance of names that are going to shape up and shake up some of the trades and who could be top line options for us as upgrades?
I think those three are the top tier ones in the forward line. There's a world where someone like a Canelo gets back into it, or a Dangerfield gets back into it, but I just don't know if I trust either of those names enough at this point. I think Petracca and Warner are two that a lot of coaches are looking at right now because of the value that they both present. Petracca didn't start the year quite as well, and obviously Warner has had that one game which really drags his average and therefore his price down. And so I think those two are ones that coaches are really looking at. The one that interests me massively long-term is Nick Martin.
Oh, yeah.
The defender forward flexibility, the fact that Essendon seem to be getting gifted early fixtures quite through the year. He might be the perfect 23rd premium for us across the formats. It's just long-term thinking, obviously, with that. But he is a player that on his day can go through the roof. You've got the ability to be able to put him in your defensive line or your forward line to be able to protect where you think your next weakest score is. He is a fantastic one to keep an eye on for the long term.
Does that include as early as this week? I know we talked about fixtures, but like this next month for Essendon is awesome. So he doesn't present in Fantasy and SuperCoach the value of others that we might be looking at in terms of what we think. But as you mentioned, the fact that that defender forward flip could be critical through the year, let alone really by trading into him now, you're giving yourself the ability over the next 5 to 6 weeks before we get to the start of the mid-season buys to go, well, if another defender bottoms out in price, I can get that. If another forward premium bottoms out in price, I can get that. So there's the versatility. But do you also then look at the fixture alongside the versatility ads? Because this is where it becomes a really interesting play with Nick Martin, because outside of last week, he hasn't really set the world on fire for us. And historically, those are the kind of games that when he was at half back with that volume of ball and marks, he probably would have gone 140, 150. So what's your take on Nick Martin as a part of that getting now? Because his price isn't screaming get me now like it might be a Petracca or a Dacos type.
So if we do a comparison between someone like a Martin compared to someone like a Dacos in AFL Fantasy, they're only 30k apart. Which one would you rather actually put the captaincy armband on at any given week? I don't think I have enough trust in Martin to put the captaincy armband onto him. Yes, he does have the defender forward status, but to my mind, that's obviously one of the big factors to consider, and it's just not there for me with him. I think he's a viable trade, and if you have enough captain options, I think if you don't, then you can obviously let him pass. SuperCoach, it's a bit different because he's actually quite cheap there. He's a $515,000 player. He's not set the world alight either over there, but you look at the fixture that they actually have had to start off the year, and it's not fantastic. It's Hawthorn, Adelaide, Port Adelaide, and then into a favourable matchup against Melbourne. Now, if you look at that and you say, well, those three fixtures aren't great, the Melbourne fixture is good, fantastic, but he didn't cash in it in SuperCoach. And we've known this from his history. He's a much better AFL fantasy scorer than he is a SuperCoach scorer, purely because he doesn't use the ball quite as well as what it looks like when you actually watch him on the ground or on the broadcast. He doesn't quite accurately hit targets. He has a few clangers. But with the fixture that they have there, it comes in as being a value pick. So, is he a viable option in SuperCoach this week? Absolutely he is. Is he a viable option in AFL Fantasy this week? I'm not quite so sure. That's how I would kind of lay it out.
Yeah. So West Coast this week, then Anzac Day, North Melbourne, Sydney. I suppose his benefit is if you're tagging a Martin over a Merritt, that's crazy, but sure. The Bulldogs, the Tigers, the Lions, Carlton, Geelong, Fremantle, and then they sit the bye in round 16. So you talk about guy with a good fixture, guy with a good bye, and we touched on, how critical it is to not forget about the mid-season buys, with 7 weeks away or so now. He does tick a lot of those markers for us. So it's definitely has to be at very least a consideration. It's not a Monty pick that you're like, I have to get him and I have to get him this week. But it is I just need to take a look at this. Let's talk about the defenders then, because I felt like good conversation on Warner. We've referenced Track a few times and a nice reflection on that. Rory Laird and Josh Dacos are the two that have come in as probably the big names. Obviously, I know Sullivan is handy from a versatility, Wicks, Stone, all these guys add some versatility, but of guys that could touch the upper edges of our defender gains, they're probably the two that have landed in that spot. Again, Fletcher's handy for draft, and there's a bunch of other ones that help us for draft and things like that. What's your take on those two guys? Because both have shown 90s is well and truly within their scope. Where do you sit on both of those guys?
I'm not massive on Rory Laird. Not nearly as much as probably you are as a Crows man. And the reason being
I'm fine to let him go.
You're fine to let him go? Well, that's fantastic then, because I think we're both in the same camp. I think that there's just too much uncertainty about what they're going to do with him. It's not the Rory Laird of 5-6 years ago where he was a fantasy stud. He will be around the 10 to 15 marker as your defensive line, but he's no longer value. He's no longer a player that you can trust week in, week out, even with a vice captaincy or captaincy armband. And there's just too much uncertainty as to what Adelaide might do in that backline any week. And that to me is too much of a concern. Josh Dacos is a much different kettle of fish because they have put him back there for purpose. And the purpose is they need to open up their distribution of that half back line, and they need to have someone actually as a trusted kicker, because Houston's great there as one of their halfback flankers, but you always need a Robin to your Batman. I think there's a word that they can both coexist and both be top 6 defenders purely because of the game style that the Collingwood play, where they do try to possess a little bit more. They're not the hard run and gun, except when they're forward of the ball. He had a poor score on the weekend, but he did cop a fair bit of attention in that game.
He got a Campbell
tag. If you look at the ones, he got a Campbell tag, which is a new one. We haven't seen too much of that. But the 4 weeks prior to that, it was 99, 85, 99, 88 AFL Fantasy, and I think it was close to the ton in the SuperCoach as well across that 4-week stretch. It's not a out-and-out top 6 defender, but it's pretty close to the mark. And to me, if there's a time when his price gets to the right point, which, given that he's just had a poor score on the weekend because of the tag, is probably 2 weeks away in SuperCoach and 3 to 4 weeks away in AFL Fantasy, he might be someone who's absolutely ripe for the picking and can get you through to the mid-season buys.
Well, let's say in 3 weeks' time. So they got Brisbane this week. The Essendon matchup looks really good for him, by the way, but that's not going to help you. Geelong in round 8 is probably the last of them. So if you're talking about a pre-buy, but get you to the buy, Fremantle, Adelaide, North Melbourne, Hawthorn, the round 13 matchup feels awesome for him, though. And that is a Melbourne game. And then it hits the buy, and then all of a sudden you turn it into the Sheasel is probably what you're looking at as an option through there with that early season buy. So
are you with St Kilda and West Coast coming straight out of that buy?
Oh, maybe not, let alone Carlton the week after that. Maybe it's a run a little bit longer. Yeah, it's not a bad shout.
He's definitely one to consider potentially even as a buy play.
Well, as a buy runner, again, we start the buys in round 12. Hawthorn's not great. Let's be honest. Hawthorn's not great if they're denying best. But then, as you mentioned, what is it? It's Eagles, it's Saints, and it's the D's in 3 of our 5 buy round matchups. So as good as you could get for a run and carry defender, isn't it? It's not a bad shout. I don't mind that. Hey, Mini, always a pleasure talking fantasy footy with you. We have covered a lot of ground and we've done it in under an hour. Record times from us, which is impressive. Hey, always a pleasure, mate. Look forward to catching up with you soon. And I always appreciate your help on these strategy sessions.
No, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to be having a chat with fantasy with you. And looking forward to catching up with you soon. Have a good one.
Look forward to it.
I'll see you very soon.
More soon than you realize, my friend. Actually, you're completely aware of how soon that is. Hey, if you want to go back and check out not only this episode, again, to just kind of reconnect with some of the points that we've unpacked, you can go back, you can rewatch it, you can go listen to it. Over on our YouTube channel, not only is this strategy session there and dropping late every Tuesday evening, but we also drop a Monday night top 10 trade targets for AFL Fantasy, and on Wednesday, we do a SuperCoach top 10 trade targets. And I'm just going to tell you now, on the weekend, as an Easter exclusive extra episode, a lot of E's in there, MJ, is we'll also share with you our predicted keeper position changes. So if you draft on the keeper platform, keep an eye out on YouTube. That will land over the Easter long weekend for you. We could see a bunch more. See a ton of changes at the end of round 3. At the end of round 6, I think keeper's got a bunch more changes to come. Make sure you're checking out us over on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed to us, make sure you do so. If you haven't liked the video and turned notifications on, please make sure you do that as well. And if you are watching this on YouTube, why don't you comment below and let us know, what are the trades you are making this week? This episode is also available as an audio podcast, wherever you get podcasts from, whether it be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the works. Make sure you're following us over there. And if it is Apple Podcasts, could you take us a minute, not only give us a 5-star rating, but also leave a review, a positive review. It makes all the difference when you do those small little things for us. Inside the description of the episode are not only all the details to where you can follow and listen to us, you can get in touch with us across social media, and you can become a Patreon. At all tiers, our Patreons get an exclusive Friday morning Q&A episode. Questions only asked by our Patreons, only heard by our paid up subscribers. At any tier Patreon, Patreon, you get access to that. We do not do in-season Q&As except for our Patreon. So if you want to get that for as little as $2 a month, you can get access to that extra podcast and support the coaches panel, or you can become a premium tier supporter. You get a bunch of other rewards, and one of the other things you get is you also get a Monday review of the round from me from a fantasy footy perspective. So you can hear, 3 audio podcasts, 3 video episodes a week. Yeah, that's a lot of MJ for you. I apologize about that. Hey, good luck this week as you head into another week of Best 22. I hope Rookie Roulette is kind to you. I hope the trades that you make work favorable and your early round VC pops so you're not stuck making a decision who your C is. And if you are, let's just hope you don't have to worry about whether someone's going to be a late in or not to add some extra stress. Hey, good luck this week from all of us here at the Coaches Panel. We wish you well, and we can't wait to chat with you again real soon.